get started here.
Because Jay caught up a little bit, I'm going to make sure we're going to catch up all the way. Ivars, I need to set the record straight. You said, I'm the only one who ever jumped in an Olympic context. There are two in here who've done the same thing. Rob, you tell them. We jumped in 1988 in the Summer Olympic Games, and there is a noticeable difference. You have a huge audience in the Winter Games, but you have probably about 10 times the audience in the Summer Games. I watched it, it was stunning. I liked it very much, really, and I think you're on the right track as well. So we got that record sorted out, and now we're gentlemen. Can I ask you to pretty much very briefly present yourself? Let's start with Wayne.
My name is Wayne Loxton, and I'm the director of the International Body Flight Association, and that's the training and standards organization for iFLY.
Brendan?
So I am Brendan O'Rafferty, and I'm Director of Safety and Training for TunnelInstructor.
I am Alberto Fuertes. I'm one of the founders of TunnelInstructor.
I started with about 20 years ago. And I fly Lyon, I fly Paris, and working on iFLY Copenhagen.
Excellent. It really is a pleasure having you on this panel. I think you are exactly the people we need to discuss this. Very important subject matter, and I can relate to it in two ways. I kind of got into professional skydiving by being an AFF instructor. That was my history. I created the School of Human Flight. We were probably the first ones in Europe. We started it in the States. We brought it here. So I like that, and I always consider, where does sport start? Does it start with the competition, or does it start a little bit lower, the grassroots, the training? It's my opinion, it starts lower, below the competition, at the level of teaching basics, of creating a syllabus, how to progress, and of producing safe and skilled students. And I know that from skydiving, and I also worked as a ski instructor in Switzerland, not professionally, well, I had the title, but worked a little bit, and really, I think you cannot overestimate the importance of training. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Reinhardt and Andre both said earlier on that indoor brings safety to skydiving, but trust me, that indoor needs safety. And that's very, very important. And in fact, Simon mentioned it earlier, that the company's #1 priority is 0 serious injury to customers and, crucially, staff. So that's our #1 priority, is to make it as safe as we possibly can. That brings its own challenges. And effectively, my job, I'm a risk manager. I can't remove the risk, I can't take it away without not doing any indoor skydiving. So my role and the team that we work with is very much about how do we mitigate that risk to make sure it's safe as possible, because that's key as well. As long as it's safe as it possibly can be, then you're in a good place. Just you accept the levels of risk that you apply to it. Our challenge really now is about scale. You know, we've got 89 tunnels that we need to look after around the world. We have almost 1,000 active instructors, most of whom now are not the skydivers that started in the industry many, many years ago. Some have never been in a tunnel before. And we've also got 600 inactive instructors that may come back again. So we need a system for bringing people in and out of the industry when they need that well-earned break. And then you talk about the flyer. I did some stats only last week, and we had 19,000 people, 19,000 flyers log into our flyer progression system last year. That's a lot of people, and we have to make sure that what we're delivering is safe, as well as progressive, is safe. And that's really our challenge, is the scale and how we manage ourselves in a globalized industry. That's probably enough for me.
And now, we all know, I mean, at the very origin of training and syllabus and defining methods, there was the IBA, the International Body Flight Association, and then a few years thereafter, there was a group of, I would say, their distinguishing mark was they were all very explicitly European, and this is no pun at you. And I think it was a group around Boris, around Paul Mayer, I think, and then you, Brendan, and this organization is called TunnelInstructor.com or .org, and let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, obviously, with the growth of tunnels in Europe, we very quickly realised, and like the IBA, that you need structure. And with structure, the end product is consistency to the customer. Some of the tunnels that you go to, you will have maybe 30,000 customers passing through in a year. And that experience wants to be consistent. It wants to be safe, as Wayne said. You do what's called RAMS, a risk assessment method statement. You look at it, you assess the risk, and you assess how do we minimize that risk. Very difficult to reinvent a wheel, but what you can do is you can make it more aerodynamic. Maybe a better way of dealing with the customer as flying changes and as more and more customers came, a different way to deal with the customer and handle the customer. And that's what we tried to apply in TunnelInstructor. So we tried to get the best of both worlds and analyze it that way.
Because other than safety, it's also a little bit about the customer experience.
But also, before you go, we also had to start to we started to gain military contracts and things like that. So we started to have to expand on the training that was already there. We had to start looking, okay, there's more to this. We've got the first-time flyer, we've got the pro flyer, and now we've got the military in the mix, with equipment, with all the gear, with testing, So, we had to adapt to all them scenarios.
Wayne, both of your organizations have a separate branch, military training, military specs.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, we're just about to launch a bespoke course for military instructors. That market is quite large. It's niche. It's very specialized, but it's very important because we have to apply the same standards. Now, we're dealing with a customer that I know quite well from my previous life, and a customer that understands risk, so therefore they demand that what we apply in our tunnels actually meets their own standards. So that's quite an easy customer to deal with, but still a risk we have to mitigate.
And at the same time, we also have to be aware of the fact that the military, having them in the business, means impulses are going out from them. I mean, were the first ones using tunnels for training almost exclusively. And Fort Bragg, they trained elite forces there when nobody was commercially involved in running tunnels. So is that positive, Alberto, in your opinion?
Well, the thing is, I wanted to say something from a second ago, and it's a little bit of your question, but we started the organization as well, more or less at the same time, but we were a non-profit organization, meaning in the way that the people that were working with us, Paul, Brendan, I, and many other people, did not make any money. So we were a little bit slower everywhere. Why I'm so excited about this coming here today and putting all these people on the same table is that I think we should try, because I think we tried in the past, but very vague, because each company or had different goals, is to put us together, because there is so much knowledge. Okay, they have, I'm not going to go into numbers, we have slightly less tunnels under our organization, but I think if we got together, all the knowledge of all the accidents, all the things that happened, if we started sharing all those things, if people had similar ratings, if people follow one thing, I think it would be fantastic. So, sorry if I just changed the direction.
No apology needed, because actually what you're saying here, and Simon, you were asking what's expected to happen here. So this would be a positive outcome, obviously, I think.
What I would like to say is a comment earlier about, someone said about the cost of the machine and the cost of the instructor. Well, probably one of the costs, the biggest cost, is obviously the electricity. But if you get the customer that comes to you and buys this experience, You know, the cost that you invest into that instructor, well, it's minimal. It's 0.0001% of what you put into the experience that you want to pass on, and also to get that customer or that client to return fly. So the cost of training the instructor is really very minimal. It's nothing. And yet it's probably one of the most important parts of your facility. It's the forefront of your business. It's the safety element, and it's everything that you need. And yet it's the part that we, as a collective, we don't seem to push enough, I don't think. You know, and I think we really need to get together and try to really push that forward as a collective, as a group, IBA and TunnelInstructor.
I think TunnelInstructor or IBA, we both invest, all the tunnels invest a lot of money in training. There's a couple of several tunnels that they don't follow any process, and I think those are the danger. You sometimes see videos where there's insane things, like, oh, let's play a game, we're going to put a fun flyer that has never been in the tunnel before and without an instructor, and it starts bouncing off the walls, and you're like, oh my God, how is this happening? So I think if we were united, if we were just one, I think people that don't have a system will go, okay, everybody's following this united system, call it whatever, we don't care what we call it. And those few tunnels that don't follow anything, and they have accidents, which then start people thinking that this tunnel thing is a dangerous thing, will dissolve, and it will be a complete 100% sport. I think Simon was correct at the beginning saying there are two parallel sports, skydiving and tunnels. I didn't agree 100% with him with saying that it doesn't matter what you call them. I think you should call them two different names. Because if you want to say indoor skydiving, when I was running Madrid Fly as a manager, always with the marketing people, I was like, stop calling it skydiving. People think it's dangerous. People, yeah, it's adrenaline seeker, that's nice, but they relate everything with danger. So I think if you gave it their own name as well, that would be good. And once again, I go back to the same topic. I'm very stubborn, sorry. I think uniting the whole thing will be the greatest thing that can happen for the sport. And I leave it there.
There is no doubt, in my opinion, I mean, I really made it a very valiant effort to catch up on the huge amount of paperwork that both organizations have created, and I really must say this is most impressive. I mean,
yeah, I can add one thing on that, in that this is probably the easiest part of our industry to get some commonality in, and we already done we spent 3 days, I think, didn't we, doing this very boring risk analysis, which is so important, that keeps our industry safe, keeps our bosses out of jail, and it's really important. And we've already done that analysis, and we already recognise that what we do in many levels is almost exactly the same, and so it should be, because we're not talking about rocket science here. The principles of coaching, the principles of teaching are similar across many, many sports. And all we're really doing is applying them to our particular sport. So actually there's already a lot of synergy in what we do across the two organisations. The key is to target those that don't bother and that give us a bad reputation.
Give me an idea, or operators that don't adhere to any type of, how many are there out there? Many?
Operators that don't follow any system? Yeah. I would say it's probably about 5 to 10%.
But it's changing. I mean, Simon said it and he was right. People want to achieve something, and that's the good thing about IBA and TunnelInstructor. There's an achievement there. At the end of it, you receive a certificate, you're accredited, you're signed off on a website, and you're monitored. And hopefully the facility that they work at, their chief instructor, will continue their growth, either through a contact like ourselves or an examiner or within their own facility. And that's all we want to achieve, to maintain a higher standard, and therefore the end product is the customer, is the client.
So, from what I hear, are the two things that I'd like to comment. One is we hear the instructor is about several jobs, actually. We're talking about safety and we're talking about sport development. And I will actually kind of split it in 3 times. An instructor has kind of 3 missions to me. One is ensuring safety of the practice. That's number 1 for sure. Then it's about the discovery part of taking first flyers to discover the element and get the autonomy. And the third one is about developing skills. And I think both organizations have organized a path to that. But there are different aspects of the job. And actually, when we operate, there are some tunnels where it's only about getting first-timers, and as here, I think the common target is about developing the industry, and it goes through developing the sport. And as you were commenting, Roland, it's not about competition. Competition is kind of final stage, but developing the skills is very important. It's, Simon mentioned, Return Flyers program. It's very important. And we put the emphasis that all instructors do not have on their mind only the safety and doing first-timers. You each time address someone as a future tunnel flyer. Let's call it this way, because I agree it's nothing to do with parachuting. So the mission of an instructor is creating future tunnel flyers. That's one part. The other part, you were commenting about getting a common system. Well, actually in France, I would not agree with you about the statistics on 5 to 10% being not outlaws, but being not having any specific training programs. France is probably the country with the highest number of tunnels per population. We currently, for a country of 67 million people, we have 25 tunnels open and running in France, and could be that by the end of this year will be 30 tunnels. So it's about 1 for every 3 million.
What's their technology?
Well, I'd say half of them are small tunnels, and there's been comments about tornadoes being mobile. Every tornado owner knows it's not mobile. When you try, sorry about this comment, they're not mobile, they are somewhere. And eventually, when business goes down, they can be relocated. But I don't know tunnel owners that are moving them, except for 1 or 2 exceptions. All the owners, we have 16 tornadoes in France, they are located somewhere, and the only 3 that moved were only because the business went down. That's it. So they're small, and they're very good for initiation, as Evas has been mentioning. It's a very good tool to start discovering the flight. And the others are all various technologies, and that's my second point. In France, we have set up a kind of our own governing body. It's called the Corporation des Souffleries Sportives, which means the Corporation for Sport Tunnels. And it's a lobbying group, and we work weekly together, and there is a very good collaboration in between competitors. Actually, we have 6 different technologies among the corporation, and we really work together on all aspects regarding the sport development, or everything that is corporate, and everything that is safety related. And then it comes to the point about instructors. You have different courses. So we have people going through the tunnel instructors, people going through the historical aero car training, and people going through the IBA. And on top of that, in France, you cannot have anything that is not legally organized, otherwise it doesn't exist. So we have another diploma that's called the CQP. Bear with the name. It's a national diploma, and we all need to get it. So even if I'm an iFLY, I'll have the IBA and the CQP. But in the end, all training centers, and we have from the 3 different training systems, all come up with the same system. And we agreed to work together to go through the same path, to the point that we have agreed, for instance, that all our flyers could go from my tunnel to your tunnel to his tunnel, as we check the same skills, because in the end we do the same job. So what you're dreaming of, Alberto, is kind of already existing, already on tracks, although through different organizations, but we already talk, and this model we have could probably be exported. We could do our own governing body, and it's not only about instructors I'm talking, it's about industry development. It's for us to grasp our future. Our industry can gather and organize itself.
I think it's great that you guys in France have your, way of managing all the systems, but it doesn't happen everywhere. And I think that's the problem. If we could get those towns that they do their own thing, to follow some kind of process, maybe the French, maybe the IBA, whatever it follows, but something, I think that would be very important. I'm not going to say names, but I've been with manufacturers that we said, we're going to send you an examiner for free. You just need to pay for his expenses and for his salary. And we're going to rate your people to be part of, in our case, was TunnelInstructor. So they could teach the system. And they were like, oh, but that's 10,000 euros. I don't want to do that. I want to save that. And then they end up doing their own thing. And then those people, yeah, they did save 10,000 euros, But when you go online into the tunnels and you look at the videos, you go, there's so many accidents, there's so many crashes, there's so many
that's
things.
why I was talking about my statistics in France would say that about 30% of people do not have rated instructors from any system.
30% in France.
Yeah, we are fighting that because the thing about our industry, we have a common interest. If anything bad happens somewhere, we all get the hit.
Exactly.
With all the investment involved, and it's not only about electricity, it's about machinery and everything. There's so much at stake that we have this common responsibility and mission to protect the people and to spread the message to have common standards of safety. And then I think this goes outside the boundaries of solely instructors' safety. It's also machinery safety. We need common standards in our industry to protect our sport.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we're talking, safety is a function of leadership. And the leaders in the industry need to buy into the principles of safety, and that's when it starts to work. And talking about the common standards, one of the things that we're particularly keen on, Simon mentioned the ASTM, that's the American Standards for Testing Material. It doesn't really matter. What it really means is something like ISO, BSI, AVNOR. It's a recognized standard that's internationally complied with. And that standard is about to go live middle of this year. It'll take 3 years to go through the political processes around the world. But that's a start. That's one start of a common standard for the building, the operating, and the training for everything to do with a wall-to-wall tunnel. And that's an important start point. But this is an opportunity. I said this was the easiest thing to do, but nothing's easy. Because when we start talking about scale, then we start talking about regulating skydivers or ex-skydivers, and none of us wanted to be regulated when we were skydiving. So there's an audit cycle that's going to need to kick in with this. But that's part of the industry, and it needs to go that full circle. We train really, really well here in most of our tunnels. We operate really well in a slightly lesser percentage, but we don't check. We make an assumption that people are trained, and therefore they are going to stay amazing instructors. They're going to stay amazing operators. And the circle that's going to be difficult to close, but with a collective approach we could get closer to it, is how we do that full audit cycle, so that we as an industry, we sing off the same hymn sheet. And that's quite an important thing to do.
One observation. It's really good that you bring it up. I mean, it falls under this overall topic as well. This self-governing industry standards. This got published about 2 months ago.
Yep.
I caught up with it because I kind of have a Google alert or something like that. I read it and I said, whoa, that's interesting. And I sent it, I think we have 10 different manufacturers here. I sent it to each and every one of them, expecting to get some type of a feedback, because obviously it is an initiative of iFLY, of yours, but it could possibly impact all the different countries, all the different, I mean, this American standard organization is very much in many industries. It's cutting the mustard. I mean, if you have a court case in Sweden and there's an American standard that applies, probably a Swedish court could take up.
I think that's the problem, and you've hit the nail on the head there. Over here, we have no consequence. The only consequence we have is a poor experience to the customer.
True.
In the States or stateside, big lawsuits, big issues, you've got to be on it all the time. You've got to make sure that guys are following processes, that their training records are up to date, and that's all on top of. You come over to Europe and you try to say, listen, guys, implement this, better experience for the customer, safer, they're going to repeat fly because it's not what they thought it was going to be, because the name indoor skydiving, as Alberto said, no, it's good, it was a great experience, I had this, they flew me high, and it was all, and I felt safe and everything was good. If the guys aren't trained as well as they should be or following any process and they have a problem, well, that consequence is just, it was a bad experience, right, and nothing more. Once that starts to change, then you will see facilities trying to say, okay, we need to implement some proper training processes. And that's obviously what we want to do. And we're trying to push that, but it is very difficult to get facilities to say, okay, come over and train, because like Alberto said, they don't want to pay any money, which is, like I said, a drop in the ocean to what they've paid, considering that the person that the customer meets is the instructor, and the person that carries them all the way through that experience is the instructor.
Exactly.
And I don't understand that. I've never been able to get my head around this fact.
So bear with me to expand the topic again from instructors to wider safety. It happened actually that there was in Europe a bad accident and it was considered that the head protection was not good enough. And then there was a process to try and set a new standard for a normative system for helmets. And actually France, a norming system has been working on that. And it was created a new norm that's called the XPS 72600. And I think this norm is now going to Europe and now will be applied in all countries.
Except for the UK.
Yay!
It will.
So it has an impact where you have a common legal system. And it could be, that's the first example. And when you're talking about cost, well, we in France had the cost of needing to change all helmets, but actually for the better. And the industry was supportive because we had some helmet manufacturers that already changed their process just to fit the new European market. So this may happen through some wider bodies. You mentioned the ACF system. I'm talking about the normative system that happened with the helmets. It will eventually come in time for the machinery and eventually for
Was
the
that for a
diplomacy.
pro flyer? Was that a pro flyer that was injured with the helmet?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that I want to come on to, because generally with a pro flyers have the ability, because of their awareness is different in the tunnel, to say, look, that's getting a bit fast for me, or turn it down, or I want to get out. And that's why we like to focus primarily on the first timer. The first timer doesn't have that ability. Generally, once they're in there, they're like a rabbit in the headlights. They're all over the place. And then it's down to the handling of the instructor and how good his ability is and how well he's been trained to understand and recognize and keep that person safe. Once you start getting into the pro flyer, then the parameters change and things change slightly with the instructing side of it. So it's a little bit different for us. But the grassroots of it, I think the most important start, the foundations of the house, is ensuring that the instructor is well prepared for the first timer, because that's where it starts. And then from there, his training will progress anyway,
So I hear
as
that.
his experience progresses.
I hear that, but when coming about pro flyers, I would just go back to we as an industry, we could work together for instructors, but not only for that, it's also for sharing our flyers, because they don't belong to us.
Yeah.
They are this global community, and they go to all tunnels, and actually there is no boundary. They're just part of global community. And we need to have systems where we can assess that what has been approved somewhere doesn't need to be so strongly checked either. If it's by a system we all abide by, if we all agree that's safe, then I can agree to get somebody that was in Madrid fly going to Copenhagen and just let him do what he's been approved to do.
That's really important, Manu, as well, because we have an opportunity to lead that discussion rather than to react to the issues that are out there. And if we work together, then we can start sharing. Again, I'll go back to old boring risk management, okay? The most valuable lesson you ever learn is the near miss, because a near miss is also a near hit. It's something that could have happened but didn't happen. And culturally, we tend to hide that, because we're either embarrassed about it because our fellow instructors are going to laugh about us, or we don't want to expose it to our boss because we might get sacked. And that's a really bad place to be culturally. A really good place to be culturally is to share everything that happens inside the tunnel, and share it with your mates over a cup of coffee and say, do you know what, I almost messed up. Nothing actually happened. But if that same incident happens again, and it will, and the consequences are far more dramatic, then that's a lesson that hasn't been learned.
I think that's something that the FAA installed, for instance, the American Aviation Federation, and that's how they drastically improved the safety. It is a very good practice to always recognize when you failed and share it. And actually, we at iFLY have a policy, and you know that.
Internal policy.
It is a professional mistake not to report a failure. If you report a failure, you will not be blamed. We will work from that. If I discover you screwed and I did not know of it, then you didn't help the community become safer. And that's a very serious mistake for a professional instructor. So I agree that sharing failures is about the best we can do, and then we should extend it from your circle, my circle, his circle, to make it a wider circle and all to be a benefit to all.
I think you both hit the nail with sharing all the things that happen. And some people in some towns, they try to hide what happened. You said that more or less 30% of the towns don't have a system.
It's been changing, maybe 15, but it's not 5. It is not neglectable, that's my point.
If it's 30, you're making my worry even bigger.
Yeah. So it's not neglectable.
So, but the thing is, I'm trying to remember, like, I don't know how many years it was, 15, 20 years ago, Brendan and I, we were at iFLY, and we were learning all these ways by hurting people. I've heard so many instructors in my life, like faces cut, arms broken, everything. So if we can get all those towns that don't follow anything to already start up with whatever system, we have a system, we have a book, you follow it. If you can at least start from here, the accidents are going to be so much less because you're already starting from something, from somewhere. But all these towns that they don't want to follow anything, I'm just thinking that they're starting that process that we had 20 years ago when there was nothing out there. There was no information anywhere. There was not so many YouTube videos like there is nowadays. I think we need to try to address those 30% of towns or whatever, 10, 15, 20. Come up with a way. How could we get all those towns that don't follow anything to follow something? Whatever, IBA, Skydiving, it doesn't matter.
Self-regulation.
It starts with that, exactly.
Yeah.
A trade organization or a trade association that chooses to comply, and that's key.
And probably extend it to everything else than instructor. Everything is related to safety, equipment, machinery, everything.
The alternative would be, as we discussed earlier, I mean, if every country would be like France, I mean, you don't have any funding issues, things become law almost automatically and always. It's a fantastic thing. And one question regarding you now having your own lobby group, and how did the French Federation take to that?
It's a partnership in between corporation and federation. Federation is representing the Ministry of Sport. They have the delegation for our sport. Under the umbrella, they have parachuting, tunnel flying, and the third one, Patrice knows better the English name for that. Parascending. And so that's under their responsibility. And we see it as federation has the responsibility to develop the sport, to name the national teams, to be the official representatives, what we call the NAC and everything. Meanwhile, we, corporation, are a professional corporate lobbying system, and we defend and work on all the professional aspects, being the instructors, so our jobs, our working environment, our fiscal environment. So we're not only talking to French Federation, it's only one of our partners. Everything that is administration, you can talk of IRS, for taxation, you can talk of sales department, you can speak of the normative system. We talk to employers union, we talk to employees unions, because we're still a socialist country. So we, as a governing body, want to be in control of everything that is related to our profession on a corporate point of view. And Federation is one of our partners, and so it's corporation and Federation have to work together.
One very brief question. You mentioned VAT, fiscal elements. Have you already been able to negotiate favorable deals for tunnels in France in terms of lower VAT because it's of a sporting nature, because it's...
No. But I know there are some countries where you have opportunities for that, like for instance in Denmark. Some sport are recognized as being good for health, and if you're able to put up a global studies that would be worldwide, and we don't have these numbers yet, then if I had to feed them into the Danish government, eventually we could join the fitness as having a tax exemption. So these things of putting data together could have some impact, maybe locally. I'm talking about Denmark there.
as tunnel instructor, we actually did try to implement what you're implementing now. We had a partnership program that brought tunnels in and did all this. It's just trying to get people on board. Very, very difficult thing to do. Paul's here, he'll tell you about it at the end, we can talk, but that's what you're doing now in France is what we tried to do. We weren't just about going around and training, we had a whole sort of network in place, and it was the partnership deal that they would come in and we would do all these things that you're talking about. It's just that as it's progressed, nobody went down that road and they just all focused on training their staff. And we even wanted to go and follow up with training and go back and assess and all these things. But again, like I said, there's no consequence in Europe, and therefore there's no consequence. So who do you answer to?
But
once that changes, then
we can start from the people that are here.
Yeah, of course.
Because my point is, see, Domi is going to open ISG tunnel in 6 weeks from now, and she's in the corporation. And we are working with Wimby, who is a Czech tunnel from Strožňany. Then we have other bespoke technology like the old Aerocar, and we are having this convention. So what I'm telling you, it could start from the people in this room having an agreement. That's where we should head, and then we come with a global attitude. And when 90% of people agree on that, the others will have to follow.
And that's how PADI started. PADI is probably the best example of where we're trying to get to. There are other dive associations out there, but PADI is the one they aspire to be a member of. But that started out in a room, probably with just about as many people as this, trying to say, how can we make our industry safer? How can we stop people being hurt while they're diving? How can we regulate the rogue operators? And that was a choice that they made. And now the rest is history. The company sold for
absolutely perfect example.
Millions and millions of dollars.
Perfect example. I mean, it's identical virtually in terms of purpose, in terms of structure.
It brings challenges, because let's not assume that PADI is without its challenges. They have their own liability issues. If a dive shop chooses to be a member of PADI are required to go and audit that dive shop. They can't just fire and forget. So there's a responsibility there. If somebody dies in a dive shop, PADI at the first instance are held accountable, because they have to go and make sure those people are operating correctly. So it does represent challenge, but it's certainly something that the Climbing Wall Federation in America did exactly the same thing. It was a choice they made. And I guess that's where we're at now. We need to choose.
Manu?
So when you're bringing another point about liability, and we're talking about instructors here, it's good that we sit here with both providers and operators. And as operators, for instance, in France, most of us, or at least all people from the corporation, agree that we should not let anybody coach in our tunnels if it doesn't have a professional liability. So these are things why gathering as a global movement could help us find better insurance for everyone. Because when you start a new sport, if you don't have many statistics, then obviously your insurance contracts are going to be very expensive. So in France, there are about 3 companies that give insurance. One is through the FFP, because they already have an experience into this type of risk. And but what I'm mentioning here is we have agreed on policies where we have coaches coming from everywhere, but in order to be able to work in our tunnel, whatever, I'm not talking iFLY, I'm talking corporation, they need to prove that they have their own professional liability. We have ourselves...
But why? For what purpose? Because
I have my own instructor on the door, being the doorman, ensuring the safety of the session. But if you're doing the skill development part of your job, then you'd come with your own, like yourself, Alberto, you come to Paris and you train some people, you're very experienced people, but although I have the responsibility of the tunnel, you're in charge of that student and I'm just supervising it. If anything happens, you have to stand first in the line, so we make sure that you're a fully responsible professional coming to me.
But my point would always be that the instructor, if he's got the training, he's got the right training provided, he can do the job and keep the guy safe while he's being coached. If he's unhappy with anything or feels that safety is being compromised, then he would just go, sorry, you don't do that. He's not at that ability or skill set. why sort of start to alienate coaches and push out and say, well, you need this and you need that, when the guy who's in the door, the instructor, as long as he's got the relevant training and can do the job. The problem is most of the people that are in the tunnel doing the spots are not qualified to do it or are unsure what they're doing, and that's when the accident happens. That's through my experience of traveling around tunnels. That's what I've seen.
Well, in most industry, when you go and you or service provider going to a company, you come with, as a professional, you're insured for what you do, and you deliver the service at some other location. You're responsible for what you do, and that's what it is. You have to get your own insurance.
There's a difference between the coaches. We see it slightly different. I think this is the only thing that is slightly different from TunnelInstructor and IBA. We see coaches in a way more or less like flyers. The guy in charge is the guy in the door. He's the one responsible for everything.
We're the same.
As he says, if he doesn't think it's safe what the coach is doing, he stops it.
We do the same.
So, okay. So I think the main thing is, as long as the whole thing is safe and the guy on the door is certified and he knows what's going on, we don't have to be so strict with who.
Yeah, I think where Manu's going with that, the insurance gets really important for the coach. I mean, you can have a debate about the difference between an instructor and a coach. And we could spend 3 days talking about that, the differences and the similarities, in fact, and in many sports they're exactly the same. We actually define it within the IBA in our documentation, and very simply, because I'm a simple guy, and the instructor is in charge of the environment, everything to do with the wind tunnel. The coach is the person who coaches the athlete or the flyer, but is still within the environment. And that's how we delineate. But where you get problems is at the more elite level, or let's say the intermediate level, when back layouts, those types of manoeuvres, which we know are very difficult, and also very difficult to spot. And that's where it becomes more difficult. Where does the responsibility lie for that more elite level flyer?
I just believe it always
it's just a
lies
difficult
with the
area.
instructor. That's just always my belief.
We agree with you,
yeah.
But that's where the difficulty
You come to that workplace
comes
and that's his job, and
Yeah.
he's responsible for that environment and responsible for keeping everybody safe within that environment. So that's
We're
just-
having a
I
vicious
think,
agreement.
maybe what I meant went to another thing that my original purpose was to say, from a wider point of view, if we agree on similar policies and where stand the responsibilities, then we can have, as a global governing body internationally, can address insurance groups and stuff like that in a better way than just coming as very scattered.
Very good example here.
So the cooperation we have in France, just a small one, it could be maybe not the good example, but if we have come with a common governing body from this meeting, we could be recognized with safety standards that would be much better accepted by insurance groups, for instance. But it's not only about that. You see the picture?
Yeah, we tried.
Alberto,
as I say, we tried.
Alberto,
We did.
I'd like to conclude this because it's almost 1 o'clock now, and we almost caught up. In Spain, situation now. In the past, here in Spain, when I was running this drop zone, being affiliated at the time, it was called FENDA, then it was FOC, and then you had the Catalan Federation and this and that. What they had in common, and I'm sure the French Federation has that as well, they offered you an insurance package that you could not even get on the normal market. I mean, it was such a premium insurance. I mean, you could go to the best doctors, the best clinics. I think it changed now here in Spain, no?
Well, I'm not too sure, to be honest, because Catalan is like a separate country.
No,
from
but like
Spain.
it was also.
So I can't.
Just sorry, before we wrap up, we've actually got a small handout if anybody's interested. It's care about safety, read the article, share the knowledge. There's plenty. We're going to hand them out if you're interested. If you're not, it's no biggie. And there's just some brief information in there about safety. Okay.
I think to wrap it up, like he was saying, I think we should try to get, now that we have a lot of manufacturers and operators here, try to come up with a date where we sit down and we try to agree to something, so we walk forward. I think that will be, if we manage to get that out of the whole meeting of today, that would be good. That would be
So book 6 weeks off.
Gentlemen, I mean, you caught me a little bit by surprise, eh? Obviously, this is the best possible outcome. And even if it's still not very defined and still in the future, I think everybody here would probably concur with me. If this happens, and I think it will, it's one of the outcomes that this summit will have helped to produce, and I think we can all be proud of that. Thank you very much, and now we're going to have lunch served in the patio. It's going to be Catalan food, good food. And,
Catalan food?
We'll start. Huh?
Yes.
No, come on, no.
Only joking, only joking.
This was innocent now. And we're going to meet each other right afterwards for the session number 4. And I think, great.